Reilly, I am so excited to talk to you today about a pain point that is ever present in my family, which is, of course, keeping the families and our individual schedules on track. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you. I had a chance to check out Lome and everything that Lome is doing to help overworked, stressed out moms like me. But before we talk about Lome, let's start by you telling us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And why did you co found Lome Calendar?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I could tell you my professionally, I've been an investor in early stage companies, a venture capitalist, been a part of some startups, been on boards, et cetera. And so I love technology. I'm a nerd. But the most important and most relevant bits of my biography are that I am the father of three, soon to be four, actually, in a month. We will have our fourth. And I am the husband of a wife who works very hard. She's an executive, and so our household is complex. It is full of fun and joy and frustration on behalf of the parents and the children on any given day, probably both. And so we desperately wanted to be good parents. I very much want to be a good husband, and so kind of coming into being trying to be the best that we could be, we needed tools and we looked around and we didn't feel like we had everything. But before that, we did a bunch of research, and hopefully that's some of what we'll talk about today.
Yes. Well, congratulations on the upcoming fourth child. That's very exciting. I hope you're getting your sleep now. That's what they always we always say to new and expected parents. So
It's hard to get sleep with three existing kids.
I know I don't know I don't even know their ages, but I'm assuming you're not getting much as it is. But
Yeah, we have a 3-year old, a 5-year old, and a 6.5-year old.
oh wow, those are young kids, close in age. So good for you. Good for you. God bless you. So let's start with talking about my problems because this is my show and I do what I want. Um, I I have an intentional living podcast, so I am preaching from my little soapbox all about how important it is to curate the life you want as opposed to letting life happen to you. I say this all the time on the podcast. But even still, as the host on this soapbox, I have an awful lot of trouble managing my family of fours, schedule, calendars, keeping all the balls in the air. I feel as though I want to have free time with my family, downtime, time to chat, time to play, time to read. But that time is often nowhere to be found. So, I guess my first question to you would be what mistakes do or did you or do you continue to make in your own home with regard to scheduling? And also, related is with regard to the research you mentioned, what mistakes do you often see other families making when it comes to their schedules and living intentionally?
Yeah, living intentionally is really hard. And part of the reason is we think that, and I've actually listening to some of your episodes, I've heard you talk and preach about this, but we think there's this ideal state we can achieve, right? That there's some catalog image or Instagram feed that if we could just achieve our lives to be like that, then we would be there and we would have arrived, and then it will be about maintaining that. But the reality is that's not actually how our bodies are designed. That's not how the world is designed. It's ever changing and it's complex. And especially if you introduce children into the mix and you introduce a shared environment like a home, you're just dealing with things. People get sick, ages change, seasons change, all these things. And so the first thing I would say is acknowledge that, be okay with that, live in the grace of the fact that we're actually all dealing with this. A single image captures a single moment, and that's not actually what we're living in. And so that's my first thought is, gosh, this is hard, but it's actually part of what we're all doing together. I think so. That's the first mistake, is believing there's an ideal state, right? And I think you do a wonderful job of preaching that that's true. I think the second kind of mistake that we struggled with in our family was not being intentional. We wanted, I mean, this goes all the way back even to the early days of my wife and I's relationship. um, you want the romance to just happen. You want the intentional conversations to just happen. But if you're not intentional about it, if you don't carve out time, if you don't uh, communicate about what expectations are, you're going to fall short. And so I think not being intentional is kind of another way of another mistake that we make. And then I think a third a third kind of mistake that we see people making is not including everyone. And so one person in the family might be sitting there going, here's the ideal, or here's what we're going to do, here's the calendar, here's the approach. It's going to, here's what we're going to do: family dinner on Monday night, and we're going to, on weekends, we're going to do this sort of thing. And every Sunday, we're going to sit down and we're going to have this type of conversation. That sounds great, but that's only one person's kind of approach to it. And the unfortunate or fortunate thing is that there are other people involved. And so I think you have to acknowledge that and include them. And so not including other people, the other people, right? The home is unique. It's shared and intimate. And just like you get frustrated when somebody leaves, their toothbrush out, or doesn't take out the trash, or doesn't, do those types of things. You also can get frustrated the way people spend their time in the house. And so I think having that intentional inclusion of other people is it. And then I think the final mistake that a lot of people make, and I'm guilty of this as well, is that we try too hard. We once we're kind of get over the hump of being intentional or whatever, we focus more on doing and less on being. And we fill up our schedule, we fill up our bookshelf, we fill up our Instagram feed, our podcast queue with things that we're going to do, new habits we're going to adopt. And this time of year, of course, that is always true. But I think really what we need to focus more on is just being present, being okay with all the people there. And that ultimately is how we overcome. So those are some of the mistakes that I've personally made, that I make still. Right. And maybe another thing is just, hey, it's a cycle, it's a rhythm. You have to have grace for yourself and everybody.
You said something there that I found really interesting. You mentioned a mistake is trying too hard. And that's interesting to me because, on the one hand, if I don't try, if I don't intentionally schedule the downtime, the time to play a family game, it doesn't happen. But then on the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum, on the other extreme, if I schedule it, then it becomes forced, trying too hard, squeezing it in, maybe getting stressed. Maybe it's not the right time because the 4-year-old's having a tantrum. And so I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're saying that there is a middle ground and that is the sweet spot. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that we're all trying to find that we're walking this kind of rhythm, this balance, and balance is tension, right? It's our muscles being in tension to keep us upright. It's not a static state. It's a Your muscles are always kind of keeping you in balance. That's the beauty of using that like balanced life kind of metaphor. And so I absolutely, yeah, we're constantly kind of, oh gosh, today I fell off too much we did a little bit too much, or this week, wow, we just weren't intentional, and that just we were on defense, everything just happened to us. And so I absolutely think that we need to get there. But the home is an interesting space for this, right? The home is not a restaurant. You don't visit it once and leave a bad review and never come back. Right? You kind of we come back every day. We wake up new every morning and we have new opportunities. And so some of the ways that I think we can offer ourselves grace in this is to say, hey, I'm just trying to get it, 51% plus of the time. I want to be this type of dad. I want to be this type of mom. I want to live this type of life, 20 plus weeks of the year, I want it to kind of look like this. And there's grace built into that that I think is really helpful as we seek to live into this.
Well, I'm assuming that your wife and you and your children have gotten on board with a shared family calendar. I'm assuming you've noticed some benefits since you've co founded and are CEO of a shared family calendar company. So give us the why. Convince us. What are the benefits to getting a family schedule right? And how can having one, maintaining one, updating one, talking about one, how can it help families like mine flourish?
So this moment that we're in is an interesting and complex moment, and I'm not just talking about the pandemic. I think we are busy. We're probably busier, like we as individuals running around this culture and society. We're distracted, and we're frequently overindulging, especially in the West, right? Especially in our affluent society. And I think that leads to exhaustion, it leads to loneliness, and it leads to being overwhelmed or unsatisfied. And we have to adopt intentional practices to kind of counter that and to remind ourselves that, who we are as individuals is okay, right? It's good. We are loved. We are known. And I think the home is a really unique place we can do that. And so when we sat down and we kind of thought, my wife and I thought about like, what are the things we want to impart to our children. We want them to know that they're loved as they are. We want them to know that they're known, and so that takes time, right? I have to know you. Uh, I'm seeking to understand them, and I want to support them in becoming who they want to be or who they're born to be. And then there's this final piece when it comes to that overindulgence. I want them to know that they're provided for, but also like they have enough. They don't need to just continually get or whatever. And so when we sat down, I'm a big, as you can tell, like I like to zoom out and then zoom in. And so when we sat down to think about, hey, how do we want our family rhythms and routines to be? Those are some big things we want to achieve. But I think that's what, for at least us, a flourishing family might look like. And so, how do we say, how do we express that to our children through rhythms and routines and intentionality? And I think for us, it was number one, we need rhythms. We didn't have any as a family, and so we need to include our children. Those rhythms need to be communication. They need to be um, yeah, fun and traditions. They need to be all of these types of things. And so some of it was just saying, hey, it's too hard to look months out or the whole year. Maybe we'll have some goals for those types of things, but like, let's just look 1 week at a time and let's just have 15 plus minutes a week where we sit down and we look at the week ahead. And if you want to talk about a transformational habit that you could adopt in 2022, um, it's sitting down once a week and having a family meeting. And that sounds like a big thing. It doesn't have to be. It can be 10-15 minutes where you just say, hey, what are the big rocks this week? What are the big important things coming up this week? And then what do we want to do this week? And then hopefully you need a systems, right? So there's the rhythm and the routine, which maybe a family meeting would be, but then you need a system to capture that. You have to capture your intentions, you have to capture the things you have to do, you want to do. And so Loam could be that system, but it, it could be a piece of paper. It could be, a lot of families have a wall calendar, a whiteboard, something like that, where you start to say, okay, what are the big? Well, we've got soccer practice, we've got um, you know grandma's coming, those types of things. But maybe there's other, oh gosh, it'd be really fun to go to the park. It'd be good to go sledding. It's going to snow, whatever the different things are. And even letting your kids, even 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds can say like, hey, I want to fill in the blank. It may or may not be something you can achieve that week, but giving them that, including them and giving them that ownership of the week actually helps their development. It helps them feel like they're not just along for the ride, and it it opens up the opportunity to do things as a family that maybe you wouldn't have ever done. So I think there's the rhythms and routine, but then there's the system. You got to capture it in something. And a lot of families are using a lot of different things there. And then it's including people. And then our family, we just fall back on being, right? Fall back on, okay, let's just be together, right? Worst case scenario, when can we have some time where we're going to be together? And I think once you have that system and once you've looked at your week, you start to go, oh gosh, we have way too much this weekend. Or, wow, there's a lot of free time. What should we fill it with? Or, yeah, gosh, maybe we shouldn't have committed to all of those. I mean, holidays, we just came out of holiday, all those holiday parties. Wow, we maybe need to bow out of a couple or find some way around, but just taking it one week at a time, at least for our family, opened up the opportunity to not have to think way far out, not have to, you know, plan that's probably going to change, but just be really practical about what can we achieve this week.
So, one quick question here to clarify. Do you have all three children, almost four children, sit down with you at this meeting, or is it just your wife and you?
Well, it's called a rhythm and a routine because it happens sometimes one way and sometimes others, right? If you miss a step in a dance, most people don't notice, but if you miss all the steps, you get really out of whack. And so I think we try every week to have this time. It's very, very difficult with young kids. It is not the sort of thing that's like, oh, what should our meal plan be? And it's like, our son wants lollipops, and somebody else wants chicken noodle soup, and like we just had chicken noodle soup like 3 times, so like it's probably not the best thing to eat, so you kind of have to right size it and realize it. We have customers at Lome, and in my research I've talked to a number of families. There are families who have these very amazing family meetings where they talk through everything. They talk about how was the previous week, what went well, what didn't go well, what can we do better, what are all the different things that need to get done, who can support who's giving rides to different. But those are older kids, and then they like finish with a family meal and um, a family game or something, and that's awesome, right? Sounds incredible. Wow, that's overblown and probably difficult to achieve for most folks, week to week. And so my wife and I's rhythm is, hey, we just need 15 minutes on a Sunday, some point on the Sunday. Sometimes it happens on Saturday if there's just something going on. But once ever on the week, we look at the week coming up, and we do try and say like, hey, is there anything that didn't go well that we need to be thoughtful about for the next week? Um, and then it's just, hey, what are the big things? And for us, we both, our work schedules dominate, and our kids, some of our kids are in school. Well, all of them are in some form of that kind of a thing. Um, and so it's just kind of like, who's driving who's doing, and you just do the quick. But once you get it down and you kind of know, like, hey, Tuesdays don't work for my wife because she has an early meeting, so that's my day. And so especially if you have a good system, you don't have to have that conversation every week. It's just there, right? It's on the calendar. Riley's driving the kids on Tuesday morning. But there are other things like, hey, the Andersons want to come over, or we really actually need to work on, Abigail has a project we really need to work on, we got to do that, and it's due on this day, that kind of thing. And so those are like big rocks, you got to drop those in because they're priorities. And then we have these things we're trying to do, right? We really want to have a family dinner, and for us, a family dinner means we have ample time. We're usually home from work a little earlier than we normally are. We try and do an easy meal so we're not spending a bunch of time, or get takeout so we're not spending a bunch of time preparing the food. And so we need a good couple hours before bedtime starts, because we also want to have a conversation, we want to hang out with our kids, we want to let them talk a lot of the time. And so sitting down on a Sunday, some of what we're saying is, how are we going to make sure we get that this week? And then for us, like, we also like to ideally have a date every once in a while, right? And so how do you put that in there too? So I think that's why it can be 15 minutes, because it can be like, hey, when's family dinner, and we know we don't have to like talk about what should family dinner be and whatever. And so when you're first getting started, I think you're probably going to take a little bit more time. But if you just take little bites and you say, hey, this week we're going to implement a family dinner. This week we're going to do whatever. You just slowly add those things over time, which is what we've done. Then you can do it in a short amount of time. And I think if I'm really honest, there are weeks where just one of us does it, right? Where it's just kind of like, hey, this was a crazy weekend. Reilly's going to do it all, or my wife's name's Katie. Katie planned the week, and we put it all in the system, and maybe there's like one or two questions to flag in the morning while we're brushing our teeth. Hey, actually, can you drive on this day instead of that day? Are you okay with whatever? But it's super practical. It's super intentional. Uh, but then including the kids is maybe we sit at the family dinner and we say, hey, this is what we've got this week. Or maybe it's Monday morning, we load up our calendar, which for us, Loam is very visual. We did it so that we could include the kids. And so it's like, hey, here's what the week looks like. And it's like shows them the food, shows them, any big things that are happening. And you can do that on a whiteboard, by the way, same type thing. But then they can get excited and they can say, "Oh, grandma's coming! Wow, I forgot that." Or they can say, "Oh, beef with broccoli! Like I don't want to eat that." And then they kind of we can decide as a family if we want to tweak things and all that.
I love the part of including the children. I think my 7-year-old would be totally on board. My 4-year-old, she's a little more finicky. She's not so mature to handle scheduling. But the two of them together, they love to know what's coming. They love to know in how many days are they going to grandma's house? In how many days is the dance recital? Whatever the thing is. And so there's definitely something to be said for including the children in the family's weekly schedule for that reason. Because how many times have you, have listeners perhaps said, okay, kids, we're doing this thing, whatever it may be, and the kids throw a tantrum or are not so pleased because we sprung it on them, right? And so another tip you mentioned there was that like you sit down with Katie and you talk about it. That's something I'm working on in my household in 2022 is sitting down and just talking to my husband more, because I think that that is a very proactive approach to family life. In my house, the way the schedule goes currently is we have a shared calendar. We individually put stuff on it, and then the other person looks at what the other person put on and is like, wait a minute, what? We're doing that on Saturday? That's not what I envisioned. And so we've all been there, right? So I think that being proactive on the front end, sitting down and just chatting about it, compromising, setting up who's picking who up from school, who's bringing who to dance, etc., can really stave off a lot of problems. Have you noticed that in your life?
Absolutely. I mean, the reason we do it is because we learned the hard way. We're not, uh, yeah, it's not some super household that had it all figured out from day one. In fact, there were many weeks, and still are. Look, I think the reason we call this a routine and a rhythm, and the reason we say it's a system is like we miss it. And things come up, and look, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Our kids are constantly changing. People get sick. People have birthdays. Like, there's just not a here's the ideal week. It's more like how do we live into the weeks that we have, and that does require us to at least have a short conversation, and you can have that conversation in any number of ways, but being able to capture the expectation and capture the intention, right? Because every family, every set of parents, every couple, there's this aspiration for what life can be, for what these children's lives can be, for what marriage can be, romance, etc. And you got to capture that. You got to find a way to harness that, because that's like real raw beauty. But this world will rob it from us. It will take it away with all the busyness that was constantly available to us, all the distraction that is at our fingertips, and the things that crowd in both digitally and physically. as you often talk about.
Oh, that speaks to me when you say this world will rob the things that matter from us if we're not careful. That is so true. I've been thinking about something that's very important for my husband and I in terms of our family life, and that is sitting down to dinner with our children most nights. It doesn't always happen because soccer practice runs late, or my husband has a late meeting, or this or that. But I think what I hear you saying, and what I totally believe in my heart, is that is step one lies in scheduling what matters. So perhaps those family dinners, and then all the other things, if they fit and they add to your life, then sure, put them in. But if they don't, those are what goes. Those are what gets booted off the calendar. We're not booting off family dinner or game night or, I don't know, camping trip. We're booting off the ancillaries. So I want to talk to you about Loam because I had an awful lot of fun and enjoyment clicking around. One thing I love about Loam is that you give suggestions for making family and familial relationships, number one. So you give conversation topics that you can just add into the calendar. My favorite one was, what's one thing that our family does well? I'm going to ask that tonight with my kids. I cannot wait to hear their responses. But Loam makes intentional family living a heck of a lot easier. So I'd love to hear from you. How is Loam different from Google Calendar or any other shared calendar out there, and why did you make it?
Well, thanks. I'm glad you're enjoying it so far, and I hope that continues to be the case. We built this first and foremost for ourselves. My co-founder and I are both longtime technologists. We come from the startup world, and we're very familiar with all the productivity apps. If anything, I probably over-index on intentionality, and so I've tried a bunch of things, and I think what we learned was a lot of these apps, a lot of this software, it's made for the workplace. It's made for our professional lives, and it's incredibly effective. These are complex, histories of how they built these platforms. There's thousands of developers working on them. Why on earth do we need another entrant? Well, I think first of all, family life doesn't happen the way work life does. Family life is, hey, we're going to go to the park after naps, before dinner, before it gets too dark, only if it's not raining. Uh, Family life is, we need a meal plan, but the meal might happen at 5:30. It might happen at 7:30. It doesn't happen in 15-minute increments in a particular conference room at a particular time. And so that first thing we said was, how do we build something that's simple enough that it can be flexible, and then customizable enough? Because the other part of family life is every house is different. That's the beauty of it. Every house is completely different. And so how do you build a tool that's effective um, for families across a wide spectrum? And that those were important things to us. So we set out to build a container that had a lot of the effective things. The other thing that we looked at and we talked to people is, most people have a system today, whether you fully acknowledge it, no matter how intentional you are about it. But when you ask a family, how do you do calendaring? A lot of families will say, we have a shared calendar or wall calendar or this sort of thing. Then you say, well, how do you do groceries? And well, maybe they use Apple Notes, or maybe there's some other to-do app or maybe they just email or text each other. How do you do chores? How do you handle meal planning? All these different things that you do as a family that don't quite fit in any box. And so we said, well, what if there was one system, one place you could go, and then what if that place was calm and visual? A lot of the other kind of marker of a lot of these existing systems is that they're professional. They look crowded. They don't inspire calm, and they don't invite us to say, wow, that's really beautiful. Maybe they have a few aspects to them where you go, wow, some designer worked really hard on that. But I think we've worked really hard to make sure that the app itself feels very visual and feels very calm and clean, even to the extent that the way we think about, we integrate with Google Calendar, but the way we think about integrating with Google Calendar is not you click a button and all your events from Google Calendar dump onto your family calendar. No, you can have it do that, but we set it up so that it goes into a place that you can individually click events, because at least the way it works in my family, every single thing on my calendar does not belong on our family calendar. There are, one, maybe two things a day, maybe a handful of things a week that need to really come over. But it's really powerful to have that two-way sync where if I change it in Loam, it changes on Google, or if I change it in Google, it changes in Loam. So we've tried to be really intentional about just making it a really effective tool. And some of the reason it's that way is because we're building it for ourselves. You heard kind of the intention that we're bringing to the table. I think you mentioned our inspiration engine is kind of what I call it, but it's the whole idea is we get stuck as parents. We have this aspiration, we have this intention that we've tried to make time for, but then you get to the carpool moment where you're taking the kid to school, or you have 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon and you're tired. Maybe somebody was throwing a tantrum, or maybe the week didn't go like the way you thought it was going to, and you just come in exhausted and you get paralyzed, and you just need a little nudge. And so, yeah, we've tried to instill that. And so, our inspiration bank, it's not thousands of items. It's ideas for meals, ideas for conversation, and ideas for activities, fun activities you can do together. And the reason that we did that is, there's not a ton of content in them. It's not this long blog article about how you do it. It's kind of like meal plan might be like tacos, and it or a conversation topic might be like, what's one good thing about our family? And honestly, our approach is you may not ask that exact question, but you might remember a question from when you were growing up, or you might even use that as a jumping off point to ask a series of questions of your children, of your family that are similar. And so that's why we call it an inspiration engine, is because most families don't need the full how to guide. They just need that little nudge in that moment of paralysis to deliver on the intention, to live out the way they want to. And so that's a huge part of what we started to do. We don't see anybody else really doing that. Of course, there are tons of places all over the internet, lots of yourself included, where you can find phenomenal ideas on how to order and structure your life. And then the final thing is it's inclusive. So we built Loam. The visual nature of Loam is such that there's actually an image view. You can turn it on so that non-readers can engage with the week. I referenced that earlier. You also, we have bedtime routines where my kids, even the 3-year-old, you set it up and it kind of looks like a game board. And so you work your way from brush your teeth to put on your PJs or whatever order, and it's fully customizable. So you don't have to be some artist or anything to come up with a cool chore chart. I was looking on the internet all the time, like trying to find good routines, and it was always like some mom or dad had put this thing on Pinterest, this incredible thing they built themselves or drew themselves, and I'm not able to do that. If I do it, it just looks like stick figures. And so we built it so that anybody could have a really beautiful and elegant thing to help kids get focused on the important routines. And then I think the other piece is there's a sharing feature on any of those things. So if you build a really effective bedtime routine, you can share that card, is what any given event or activity or conversation is called a card. You can share that publicly. And so other people can add that to their Loam. And that's kind of acknowledging the fact that really families learn from each other. When we're struggling, we reach out to our community and we say, gosh, bedtime is going really poorly for my 4-year-old. I don't know how to do this. Like, I forget, it's not going the way it did with the other kid. And so, people help you. And so we anticipate and even are starting to see people on Loam sharing, hey, here's what bedtime routine looks like for us, or here's a meal that's really effective for those family meeting or family dinner nights, kind of a thing. So that's Loam. You can accomplish all of it in other systems. And the most important thing, to go back to what we've talked about, is that you have a rhythm and routine, that you establish a system to capture your intention and your aspiration, and then you live into it with grace in a way that includes everyone in your family and allows you to screw up occasionally and know that at the end of the day, it's, are you doing this the majority of the time? Are you living the way you want to? Are you creating the environment in your home that is nurturing and establishing a fertile soil for flourishing?
My final question for you, Riley, is for the listeners who are on a shared calendar currently, and maybe their rhythm routine isn't anywhere near perfect, but they get stressed out about the thought of switching over to something new, learning a new format technology. Do you have any words of encouragement for them?
Your system has to work for you. So, as I was just saying, I think the first thing is, if you have something, number one, if you have something that's working, stay with it. If you have something that might be working for you but is not working for your partner, or including your children, um, take take steps, try things. I love there's an approach to change that says, like, just do one small incremental adjacent thing. So you already have the system, try just putting it on, try using your exact system but put it on a different platform. Try something else free. Take a So a lot of times we encounter families where the one partner has a really robust system that's working, but it doesn't include the other partner. And so conflict arises when it's like, well, you planned something for the weekend, or I didn't know I had to be home, or I missed the pickup, or those types of things come up, and there's frustration. And so what's something you could try to include that person? And maybe it's, you just on a daily basis need to take a picture, like if you're using a paper planner or wall calendar that's on the kitchen or something like that, take a picture and text it to your partner who's not there, and to share it when you update it. I, but how do you do even more than that? And so just those little incremental changes to get there. And then I think the final piece I would say is, look, technology is scary. Actually, a lot of the homes um, that Loam works in are homes that try to be low screen homes. They try to be really intentional about the inclusion of technology in the lives of their children, and also these are also typically people who are intentional about the way technology infringes on their own personal lives. And so be thoughtful, because the default settings of technology really matter. What are the incentives? What are the goals of any piece of technology you're bringing into your family's life? Are they trying to suck you in? Are they trying to harvest your attention or your data? Are they trying to get you to buy more stuff? And too often, a lot of these big companies are doing that. And I think what we're trying to do at Loam, and I think what a number of other companies can do pretty effectively, is have a different default. And so something that we talk about is, when you're trying something new, think about, how does it make you feel? What do you think's happening with your data? What do you think's happening with how much time do you have to spend to get it to work? And the thermostat is a piece of technology. It But you don't spend a bunch of time on it. It's referential, right? You walk up to it, you change it. There's all this incredible stuff, especially if you have one of these smart thermostats you can access from. There's a lot of technology built in there, but you're not supposed to just hang out there. And so my push would be, especially if you're bringing technology into the home, that you would look for technologies that are built to be referential, they're built to be thoughtful, and they're built to assist based on their defaults, not based on some power user coming in and setting it up to be effective for your family.
You've convinced me, Riley. I'm on board. Where can listeners learn more?
Yeah, so the company Lome, Lome, our website is withlome.com, and we actually have a special offer for your listeners today. And so if you go to withlome.com/minimal, withlome.com/minimal, you can see the details, you can learn more, and at that place we're actually offering your first month free. And so we do normally have a 1 week trial, but this gives you a full 1 month free to try out Loam to see if it's a system that could work for you, and maybe have some fun and have some new conversations.
Reilly, I just want to thank you so much for this conversation. You've really given me the inspiration to sit down and talk with my husband, as opposed to just sticking things on the calendar and hoping he goes along with what I scheduled. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for all the intention that you and your users bring into life. May your families and your households be blessed.